All right, we good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, we're trying something new here at FIRE. We're going to do a weekly news show recapping all the things that are happening in Fireland. I think we're going to call it FIREside Chat, which Creeley, Sam, Peter, you might remember was the name of a long ago FIRE podcast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are we really bringing that thing back?
I don't know. I think it's kind of funny.
You don't think it's a bad omen?
What was the podcast, man?
There were just like 3 episodes of it.
There's
Why
more
did they-
than that,
website
but
forever. I
not
don't
very
know.
many.
I think it was
Not
just
very
before
many.
its time.
The podcast was
Before its
Before its
time.
time.
It was revolutionary at the time. The world wasn't ready.
Now the world's ready, hopefully, for FIREside Chats Take 2, the video version. We're hoping that these are 25 to 30-minute conversations about the news of the day. There's a couple of things I want to get to in this first pilot conversation. Joe's already told me that it sounds cluttered and congested, so we'll see if that works.
That's just your goal now.
That's where I live. I live on the corner of cluttered and congested.
Well, he's paraphrasing.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Okay, and one of the things that I want to talk about first are these plays that are getting canceled on various campuses. We have Knox College, I believe a private college, right, Sam?
Yeah.
In Illinois. And then we have, of course, Brandeis University. Knox College canceled a play by Bertolt Brecht called The Good Person of Szechuan, which I've actually talked to a playwright, and they told me it was originally called The Good Woman of Szechuan.
It was.
It
This
was?
is true. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what my translation is called.
Yeah, you did a translation of the play?
No, the one that I own.
Peter's in this conversation because he's a
Yeah.
playwright himself.
That's generous.
But
But
I
I
wrote a
award
play that was
winning.
produced, though.
Yeah.
yes, I meet the very bare definition of playwright by that
wrote a play.
that definition.
Anyway, the good person or good woman of Szechuan was set to be staged at Knox College, and according to an Inside Higher Ed report by Colleen Flaherty, it's a study of China, the play is, of which Brecht knew very little, and the play uses the country as an otherworldly backdrop against which to explore issues including morality, greed, commodification, and love. And the story itself follows Shen Te, a young prostitute who is treated so poorly by fellow townspeople that she invents a male alter ego to protect herself. And the play asks, can a person be good in a world that isn't? Well, they tried to put this play on, and students at the college complained of racial insensitivity. It's a predominantly, I guess, white theater department putting on a play with predominantly Asian characters. And the students were successful in petitioning the university or the department to get the play canceled. The other play we're talking about here is the one at Brandeis, the one called Buyer Beware. It's about it asks this question, what would happen if Lenny Bruce came to campus today? The play hasn't actually been published, unlike The Good Woman of Szechuan, but FIRE actually managed to retain a copy of the rehearsal draft, and it's about this guy who discovers Lenny Bruce in Brandeis's Lenny Bruce archives, and he decides he wants to perform some of this material for the Brandeis community alongside some of the material his own, and some of the material uses racial epithets in the vein that Lenny Bruce used them, and Lenny Bruce used them to try and take away the power. He said, if we use these words enough, they'll lose their sting. Well, he's overheard practicing his routine. It's posted to a social media account. Black Lives Matter picks it up, tries to protest the play, get it canceled. They're successful in getting the administration to try and throttle the play. The play ends up going on, yada, yada, yada. But in this case, fiction imitates real life because the play sparked outrage among a certain segment of the student population, said it was racially insensitive for its treatment of Black Lives Matter and for its use of the racial epithets in the Lenny Bruce skit. And the theater department canceled the play, prompting outrage among some in the free expression and arts community. Dramatists Guild wrote a letter, FIRE wrote a letter, and Penn Jillette just published an op-ed in USA Today entitled, "If Brandeis Wants to Censor Lenny Bruce, I Don't Need a College." Sam, you wrote about both of these, didn't you?
I did, yep.
You want to tell us about it?
So, to me, the biggest thing here is the fact that we have departments at major universities essentially allowing students who are ostensibly there to learn dictating what they are and are not going to learn. The phrase that comes to mind for me is the inmates are running the asylum. When you think about the cost of college, right? I think in the blog I looked on Brandeis website and like $270,000 for 4 years at Brandeis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think universities are kind of at a crossroads because they have to decide, do you just basically go there to buy a degree? You show up, you say, here's what I am and I'm not willing to learn, and I will study what I see fit to study and not study what I see fit not to study, and complain when you ask me to study things that I don't want to study, and walk away with this degree of questionable value, or am I actually going to go and be educated?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really troubled to see this trend of faculty sort of caving to student curricular demands.
Here's my point on that. I went to part of NYU, the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, and we were empowered as students to do a lot of our own curricular design, which was great. But we did it with faculty oversight, and we relied on that because we didn't know what we didn't know. And so I think that dialogue between student and professor can be really helpful and useful. What bums me out about these two incidents is the fact that the plays were canceled prior to them being staged, right?
Right.
That there was this preemption of the kind of discussion cycle that free speech is supposed to enable and empower. If you didn't like the play, be it the Brecht play or the Lenny Bruce play, write about that. Say this play is the most racially insensitive piece of garbage I've ever seen. Start a dialogue that way. But by canceling it beforehand, you've committed that kind of preemptory assignment of authority to yourself to decide what's possible for your peers to hear. And that kind of prior restraint, so to speak, to use the term of art that comes naturally to mind as a First Amendment attorney, it really is an affront to your peers, right? You got to let them decide for themselves, and you decide for yourself, and then you talk about it. That's the beauty of it.
Particularly in the case of the Brandeis play, some of the people who were calling the loudest for its cancellation, as far as we know, never read the script. One of them admitted in the Brandeis student paper.
I don't need
so they're
to
basically
read
saying, I haven't read this, but none of you are going to see
Yeah.
it.
Well, I don't think, going back to Knox College, I don't think most of the people calling for the cancellation of The Good Person of Szechuan had read that either. I'll be frank, I hadn't read it in about 15 or 16 years. I had to go dust off my copy, and I cracked the spine while I was reading it at home. I had my old translation called The Good Woman of Szechuan. I can object to this as a civil liberties advocate, but I think Will has said it pretty well. There's something particularly offensive to me, especially as as a theater person, as a former theater practitioner, as a very bare minimal playwright. The arrogance of kind of like deciding what your peers should be allowed to consume.
Yeah.
Making that decision there is a particular kind of offensiveness to that. There is a particular kind of arrogance, and it should sit really badly in the academic community, and it's disturbing that it apparently doesn't.
Well, it's also a problem that we don't generally value having speech, even speech that ends up being worthy of criticism out there, because even if you buy all of the arguments for why both of those speeches,
Those plays.
those plays deserved the reactions that they got in terms of the criticisms. Before you get to have that material out there, you don't get to really let your thoughts become concrete. There to me is a value in having things out there that receive criticism, because it is a reminder that there are good and bad ideas out there in the world, and that we haven't gotten past all of these issues and become a post-racial, equal society. So I'm troubled on that level too.
Yeah, one of the professors at Knox College, Emily Anderson, she's a associate professor of English. She said, "There's plenty to criticize in Brecht's plays, but we can't criticize them if we haven't seen them. There may have been plenty to criticize in this production of Szechuan, but as it will not be produced, we will be unable to criticize it. This is a pity, as I might have learned something." But in the case of Brandeis, this was a play that, if I'm recalling the facts correctly, had been read by the faculty in July. They said they loved it, they can't wait to stage it, and then it got in the hands of students, and they said it's problematic, and they launched a campaign, or letter writing and social media campaign, to the president of the university, the faculty department, and it's more or less 2 or 3 students who decided unilaterally for the rest of the college that this thing wasn't going to get staged. And Sam's completely right. One of the alumna who was leading the charge in protest of the play said that it was racist and it would be harmful if the student population if staged. Again, she didn't read it. And then another one of the current students at Brandeis who did read the play said the issue we all have with the play is that Weller, who is the playwright, Michael Weller, is an older, straight, gendered, able-bodied, and white man. And this isn't his place to be stirring the pot. The university, I mean, for its part, claims that there was no censorship going on here, that the faculty decided that the challenging issues in the play necessitated a more appropriate setting to stage it, and
Okay,
that
off campus, right? Yeah.
off campus in a black box theater with no support, and that Michael Weller just decided that's not how I do a play, and decided to take it elsewhere. One of the director, Sam Weissman, said that he was told by this guy Robert Walsh at the theater arts department that they just wanted the play to go away. So this trying to move it off campus thing was just a way to bury it, and they were successful in doing it.
I also read that that there was a claim that the faculty wanted it staged at a time when they could have it be part of a curriculum where they can describe and why they had problems with the play at the same time in coursework, and they claimed that there was an academic kind of freedom angle to the faculty getting to decide what happens on campus and when, as opposed to the obvious rejoinder, which is that any faculty member, when they have courses, can choose how they want to engage material, but they can't preemptively prevent other people from speaking their minds until they are ready to respond. So that was an interesting argument that I read that they
Yeah,
floated.
I mean, I think there's a merit to that point that the university makes. Faculty can decide how they want to engage with various material, but the issue here was that they had a plan for it. They scheduled the performances for November 16th through 19th, I believe. They had hired sound designers and stage managers and directors, and this thing was happening. And then the play got in the hands of the students, and they decided it no longer was. And we received an open letter from one student who said, in silencing this particular work's presentation on our campus, again, silencing, we're not refusing to engage with troubling perspectives or prohibiting others from learning about them. We are merely refusing to further disseminate the idea that in demanding justice and equality, people from marginalized communities pose some sort of threat to our nation's state of well-being. I've read the play. I don't think the play does anything of that sort. They're entitled to their opinion, but for me, I think everyone else is as well, and the student and those participating in this protest decided unilaterally for everyone else that this is what the play means, and therefore no one else should get to see it. And I should say, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I think, going back to the academic freedom point, I think that part of the problem is, when I wrote the blog about it, what I called it was something like, our universities
I have the blog here somewhere.
abdicating their responsibility to educate students for fear of offending them. So I think that from an academic freedom standpoint, if what happened was actually a really good faith dialogue where students and faculty sat down to talk, and the faculty came away from that meeting saying, you know what, these students raised some really good points that we want to think about and discuss before we stage this play. That would be one thing. But from all accounts, that's not what happened. Right. And as at many other as we've seen with other issues at many other institutions, it was simply a caving in, a kowtowing to demands, probably more out of a desire to maintain order and avoid controversy at the university than out of sort of a genuine pedagogical need.
I'm not even convinced that a genuine pedagogical need, allows you to preemptively decide what other people can put out there in the world. You're always allowed to respond whenever you want to and wish to respond and make those pedagogical decisions for yourself, but to say that until I'm ready to, no one else can speak on things that I feel are important for me to engage in, I'm unfamiliar with that argument in any particular context other than this time, and I just don't find it to be persuasive.
What I would love to see happen, if when you were describing the plot of the play, I've read about it in news reports, but I haven't read the script as you have. When you were describing the plot of the play, I was like, is he actually describing the plot, or is he talking about the... What I would love to see happen is for Michael Weller to write the cancellation of the play by Brandeis into the play itself.
Right on.
And then there can be... And I've seen a couple plays in Philadelphia do this very successfully, where at the end the curtain is sort of pulled back and the fourth wall broken, and it's all a play within a play.
Right.
I would love...
An Inception?
The Curb Your Enthusiasm season about the producers.
Right.
Where Larry is starring in the producers.
Right.
Well, I don't know if Michael Weller's going to produce. I doubt he's going to produce the play on Brandeis' campus. He's still accepting the Creative Arts Award, which was supposed to be paired with the production of this play. But I do think he is planning to try and find a place off campus to produce the play, professional theater, or maybe another campus other than Brandeis. I don't know, but it remains to be seen. This story is still unfolding because Penn Jillette's op-ed in USA Today came out today, and I know student newspapers are still pounding the pavement.
Maybe Penn Jillette can get the stage he uses on the strip to allow a production of the play.
I was actually thinking
and get it in front of even more eyes.
There's actually a character in the play who might be good for Penn if he's looking for any theater gigs.
Yeah, and let's just note before we move on, because I feel the move on vibe happening. But we haven't even talked about the fact that it's Lenny Bruce. We'll just leave it there. We can just all note it. Like, this is not just a play that about some fictional character, somebody who had nothing to do with censorship in their life at all, and who wasn't in fact arguably killed by censorship.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll just leave that there. Okay. Now we.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a good point, Will. They have the Lenny Bruce Archives at Brandeis.
They have the archives there.
And it's a school named after Louis Brandeis,
Yeah.
the Supreme Court justice who wrote one of the greatest opinions in support of free speech ever in his concurrence in Whitney v. California.
Yeah.
It's almost like they dipped themselves in irony.
This headline could be straight out of the Onion.
Exactly. I told the Boston Globe when they called us about this, when it started breaking a couple weeks ago, I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is like a prank. Like, is this a put on?"
Well, and as Sam was saying, we've got a play called Buyer Beware at a four-year college. It costs $270,000.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. And now we will move on. I want to talk about another case that we're working on here at FIRE at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, where we kind of got a throwback, right, Will?
Yeah. This is
how
old
you've
school,
described it. What happened?
Culture war, political football fire case where it's something out of like an 80s movie. You've got like students who want to save the student union. Student union at Rensselaer Polytechnic has been run by students for something like 137 years.
127.
Thank you very much. And they have worked hard to preserve its character. They manage the budget, they run all the operations, it's the students' deal.
It's pretty profitable, right? Which is the issue.
Yeah,
here.
it seems like it's well run, and it serves a real function at the school and for the students. And there's been this multi-year battle between the students and the administrators, again, playing the role of villain in the 80s movies, those power-hungry administrators who just want to snatch up the student union for their own ends. And so there's this great Save the Union campaign the students have been running. Note here the refreshing lack of any kind of cultural overtones, any kind of politics. This is just students versus administrators. It's like saving the record.
It's like an 80s movie.
You gotta save
there's
the
got to be a love story in there somewhere.
Right, well, hey, maybe we should call Michael Weller and say we got your sequel. So the RPI folks have, over the course of a couple of years, engaged in various censorship activities, to put it awkwardly. Like, they've ripped down student signs that students have put up about Save the Union. They've restricted the space where students can protest. They have...
And the animus here, though, is presumably, or the theory goes, that they want to take it over because it's profitable and the university could use the money.
Yeah, and there's been this battle about it, and the university is basically trying to stamp out this student dissent, this student effort to save the union, and it's gotten ugly. And now students are facing pretty serious disciplinary charges just for being interviewed on TV. I mean, do you have the details here?
I've got some of the details. I think the most shocking one is that they charged a student with operating a business because he distributed a flyer criticizing Rensselaer's administration.
Yeah.
I mean, has that charge been dropped? Do we know?
I don't know.
The latest report.
Where you could summon Adam Steinbach, who's been the
he's in Colorado today.
of all
Otherwise,
things,
we would.
Of all things RPI, but it seems like we've written. I just was editing a blog just now before we started filming it. This is the 6th time we've written about RPI. We've written them 3 letters already this semester.
They're intransigent.
Yeah.
They're just bad actors. I mean, we've seen some truly.
They're also being caught up.
State.
They're also getting caught up in the due process stuff.
Yeah, they.
I mean,
that's right.
They're being absurd on so many fronts right now that you have to just wonder what is going on.
But I think there's an important point here about, yes, this case is not about the culture wars, but in a lot of ways, and I think this is something that's important for students and people on all sides of the political spectrum to understand. None of these cases, when administrations step in, are really about the culture wars. What happens is you have administrations looking out for themselves first.
Yeah.
So often, students will think,
That's
we've got
exactly
the
what Brandeis
administration on the side of our cause, and thus we can trust them with all this power. Whereas the reality is the administration is always going to look out for itself.
That's right.
So once students are willing to cede power and authority to the administration to police the behavior of other students, the speech of other students, you know, the administration is not on one side or the other of a culture war. I mean, they may have their sympathies, but the reality is that, you know, particularly in this age of the more corporatized university, they're looking out for the brand.
Yep.
And so students need to get past the idea that somehow, you know, they can give an administration this power and it will always be used for good and always be used for their causes. So there's a lesson here for everyone.
Well, one of the bullet points here in the list of things that Rensselaer has done wrong was preventing any students from protesting during homecoming week, and in particular during this black tie gala for donors.
Right.
It seemed like they didn't want to upset the apple cart for these donors. The students, of course, protested anyway, resulting in more disciplinary charges.
I'll say that doesn't get the greatness of what they did. They, you know, their flyers were getting torn down, so they rented trucks that they
Yeah.
plastered their protest posters on, and they parked them around the campus where they couldn't be moved. So, like, let's, you know, want to make sure we get the greatness of the protest.
And another
You
thing.
know what's
that-
funny? If
Go ahead.
you read the full script of Bio
I
Reviewer,
did.
so you'll be able to tell me. But am I correct that part of the plot involves the school not wanting protests to take place because there's going to be a wealthy donor on campus,
Yes.
and then the wealthy donor ends up funding the play or something like that?
That's exactly
So-
what happened.
Spoiler alert! Come on, Sam.
Well, yeah, no. So there's this donor who has a meeting with the administration and mentions in passing that he doesn't like protests. And then when the administration gets wind that Black Lives Matter is planning to protest this Lenny Bruce routine on the very same day this donor is visiting campus, the administration says, "Oh no, student who wants to do the routine, the room that you reserved is no longer available." And then he does kind of like this forum swap that we sometimes see happen on campus, where he goes to a place where the university has no control. The protests ensue, and the donor actually happens to walk by and sit in on the play and loves it, you know.
And I think that, am I right? That was part of what the students didn't like about the play either. Was the ending? Was that they didn't like that? You know, in their mind, that he kind of got away with it. He kind of got everything in the end.
Well, I don't.
So really, he captured not just the student, the zeitgeist of, you know, students calling for censorship, but also of administrations looking to protect their brand when
Yeah.
But one
when
of the
donors are on campus and stuff.
One of the sad things, though, is that I just think that they're wrong about that from a strategic perspective. I think that donors want to see an actively engaged student body. The donors aren't looking for, you know, for students to be right on everything or to agree with everything, you know, that's said, but they want a vibrant student life that exists more when you have fewer rules of censorship and fewer restrictions. So I think it's short-sighted.
Yeah. If I had millions of dollars, I'd make sure that I only gave to universities that earned FIRE's green light.
Well, wasn't there
Would it be
a
bad
donor
for
that
the
recently gave a huge check to the University of Chicago because of that institution's commitment
we
to
read
free
about
speech?
that
It was
in the
over
Maroon,
$125 million donation, which, by the way, to anyone watching this, I too have a demonstrated interest in free speech and would happily accept checks sent to our FIRE offices.
You know, just to also mention how misguided the student protests of Buyer Beware is. I mean, at the end of the play, the students protesting the Lenny Bruce routine ultimately get what they wanted too, which was a demand that they hold a separate graduation for, you know, students of color, and they got it as a result of the conversations that came in the back and forth surrounding the Lenny Bruce play. And actually, all the students, you know, from all the various interest groups at the end of the play end up coming together, and there's this sort of like kumbaya moment. But nobody is going to know about that because the play is not happening anymore. What do we do moving forward with Rensselaer? I see in our press release here that we are calling out that its accreditor requires a commitment to freedom of speech, and the university presumably isn't doing.
Yeah, stay tuned. I
buying
mean,
that.
I don't want to give the game away here, Rensselaer, if you're watching. But
We could good diversionary tactics.
you will be called to account. I mean, look, we will continue to bang this drum.
It's a private university.
It's a private university, but listen, I'm just not going to say anymore. I would just
It
say
promises
we're-
free speech. It says it's citizens of the nation at large, Rensselaer students. The administration shall not impede or obstruct students in the exercise of
Well,
their fundamental
even
rights
if we
as
set
citizens.
aside for a moment what we do, the issue isn't going away. The public
Yeah.
isn't going to stop looking at what the administration is doing there. And if they want to get off of the top half of the fold, they should start listening to what some of the critics have to say and come to the table in good faith about turning this around and showing a better appreciation for students' rights.
Right
And
on.
until they do, it's not going to end for them.
Yeah.
And we will be here.
Yeah, our video guy Chris Maltby was actually on campus.
Can we
Was
get a
that
shout out,
last
Chris?
week?
Hey, Chris.
Yeah. Chris, come over to the mic. Do you think the students are done? I mean, what do you think the next moves are here?
Just to borrow that from Peter for a sec. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, well, so you were talking with students
Right.
last week, I think.
Yep.
What's your impression of what their plans are moving forward?
Nothing against any other students that I've ever interviewed or met, but these students have their stuff together. This is fire. They have their shit together. The alumni are not happy that the treatment of students, as well as the Save the Union campaign, has been slapped on the wrist, or even worse than that. It seems like, from what I gather in my interview with Bill Puka, who's a professor that's unhappy with Shirley Jackson, the president, is that everybody is unhappy with the current administration and specifically the president.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine that just nothing happens, that this goes away. So I can't predict over the next couple months what's going to happen, but I have to imagine that
The students are going to keep the pressure on.
Oh, yeah.
Fire's going to keep the
no
pressure
doubt.
on. Okay.
These students that we've interviewed, and they're all engineers. They all think things through 10, 20 steps ahead. So I'm really impressed by them.
Systems oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't see this ending well for the president in particular.
All right.
Past that, I couldn't have any guesses for you.
Over the last few years, we've been in a lot of situations where students were demanding censorship, and we've been calling on administrators to resist it and to say, administrators, you're the ones who need to take control here because you're the, the ones who are charged with these responsibilities. And it's nice to be, ironically, back in a situation where we can, without any amount of hedging, say, students, you got this completely right. And this administrators need to be respecting your rights here, and the administrators themselves, are leading censorship, because I think it's been very frustrating for a lot of us on staff to see that trend of more students leading the way in censorship. So this is another kind of classic old school Fire case where we're back to the bread and butter work that we've been doing for years.
Before we move to our last topic, I want to play devil's advocate here, because I was reading, I don't know, somewhere in this Inside Higher Ed report about the Knox College case, where one of the professors says, I'm reluctant to push back against the students because I was around in the 60s when we students were pushing back against our administrators and their visions of what a university is supposed to be, and they felt that they were in the right as well, and that they could set the curriculum and set the standards, and to a certain extent those same students today are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah. You want
Because
to
we revere the Berkeley free speech movement.
take it first, crack.
I think in the 60s they were demanding that the administration devolve more power and more autonomy to them, and I think today it's precisely the opposite. If you wanted to put it one way, then in the 60s they're advocating for more rights, more free speech, less administrative control over their lives, and now they're essentially demanding that the administrators make more decisions. That they're all too happy to give their power back to departmental administrators, to university administration. So I think that the direction that the rights are flowing is different.
Will?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, there's a classic academic impulse to kill your idols, right? You learn about things so you can dismantle them. I mean, that's part of the fun and vitality of getting your liberal education, right? You learn to read Shakespeare, and then you learn to say, let's take it all apart. What is Shakespeare doing that gives these plays their import? Now, how can I take that apart? How can I critique it? How can I build upon it? So I think there's this healthy academic impulse. What worries me and what I get very deeply troubled by is what we talked about earlier with this, not just to deconstruct it, not just to criticize it, not just to take down the classic text, but also to not just take them off the shelf, but to burn the book, right? It's not just we're not going to we're not just going to criticize the play. We're going to make sure it doesn't get aired at all. I mean, if Bertolt Brecht can't be performed on campus,
An anti-fascist, anti-capitalist guy who fled Europe.
And
he flees Nazi Europe. He comes to the United States and he flees the McCarthy.
And
blacklist.
The irony,
they-
irony among many ironies, is that a lot of his first English language productions were done at American college theater departments.
Right,
That's
so-
where a lot of
Wow.
his plays had their American premieres, was in university theater.
And I think that one, The Good Woman of Szechuan, was originally staged in what was like 1941. Yeah.
Yeah, not McCarthy, just the anti-communist fervor. He flees that and heads back to Europe. I think he ends up in Switzerland. Anyways,
Oh,
but
yeah,
long story
yeah.
short, like, you know, so that seems to be the difference there, right? The idea that there is an enlightened few, and they will make the decisions for what can and can't be seen on campus.
Right.
And any kind of faculty acquiescence with that, I think, is a mistake. And if I was a student, and we've seen actually at Reed College some of the interesting reporting on what's happening at Reed, freshman students are showing up, and they're frustrated with the now a couple years long protest of the required humanities course at Reed, which students have been disrupting and occupying the stage and kind of making
Yeah,
sure.
they go and sit in front of the lecturer
Right.
for the whole entire
Right,
class
there's
with
been-
signs.
I understand there's been attempts at faculty dialogue with the protesting
Yeah.
students, but it's really gotten pretty nasty. And so now the incoming class at Reed is saying, wait a second, you don't speak for us. We want to actually hear what these professors are saying, and we'll decide for ourselves. So I think at some point, and maybe this is because I'm a free speech optimist, I think at some point, students who dub themselves the arbiters of what can and can't be seen on campus, they're going to run into resistance from their fellow
Yeah,
students.
that's
Like,
interesting.
You know, at some point, I mean, I did a lot of student activism. If somebody from my group or another group was telling me what I could and couldn't hear, I'd say, you look an awful lot like the people that we were started out protesting in the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
place. So we'll see.
And I'm going to add just a note on Brecht, because some of the people watching this may have some vague familiarity with him. They may know he's a sort of notable figure in the theater. I think a lot of playwrights would say probably no one has had a bigger influence on the theater in the last 100 years than
Yeah.
Bertolt Brecht. I know Tony Kushner, one of my cultural heroes, author of Angels in America, who has written translations and adaptations of some of Brecht's work, calls Mother Courage and Her Children the greatest play of the 20th century. He's not some obscure figure. He's, as far as the theater goes, he's canon.
Yeah, and in many ways, well, Michael Weller might not be on the same level as him, but Michael Weller is an established playwright
He is.
himself. He's the
Oscar
guy who wrote,
nominated.
Oscar nominated for writing the script for Ragtime. He did, what was it, Moonchild was
he did Hair, he
Hair.
did the movie version of
Well,
Hair.
now they're not just canon; they're canon fodder.
Oh.
And scene.
But anyway, I mean, the tale of that is that these are people whose work have stood the test of time.
Which,
And-
which,
That was actually one thing I thought about calling my blog on it.
Yeah,
Scene.
which in some ways makes him more apt for criticism, right? Like, I don't think anybody, be it Brecht or anybody, should be above criticism. I know that's not what you're suggesting. I just think that when your criticism starts escalating to the point where you're no longer just criticizing the text, you're saying, we need to burn this, we need to get this out completely.
Yeah.
That's when I say, dangerous things are afoot.
All right, well, I think Joe was right when we started out and said it was cluttered and, and we had a lot to cover. Anything we want to wrap up with? Any thoughts?
Happy
I'm
Thanksgiving.
happy to
Yeah,
have
happy
it end with "I
Thanksgiving,
told
yeah.
you so."
All right, we'll see everyone next week. All right, thanks,
Cool.
guys.
Yeah.